Good morning.
Good morning.
It's wonderful to be back after a bit of a layoff. Good to see all of you here this morning. It starts with a story, as the great religions do. A simple story, without the later mythological and dogmatic embellishments. It may or may not be literally true, but it has an underlying truth that has survived for millennia. As Jeff just related, it's about a young prince, the son of a local minor potentate in Nepal near the border of modern-day India. As best we can tell, he was born about 563 before the Common Era. Named Siddhartha Gautama, he was his father's only son, and as fathers often do, he had great hopes for Siddhartha. Hopes that he would be a great warrior and ruler, conquering many domains. Wanting to protect him from the harsh reality of the world, Siddhartha was kept on the palace grounds, surrounded by beauty and luxury. On the few occasions he was allowed to wander outside the palace, a large retinue whose responsibility it was to keep him from seeing anything not beautiful or luxurious accompanied him. For Siddhartha's father did not want him to be troubled by the day-to-day pain and suffering of life. Yet one day, while out riding, Siddhartha happened upon an old, shriveled-up man. When he asked his companion what was wrong with the man, the companion replied that he was simply growing old, that it happened to all of us. On another day, he saw someone who was ill, asked what was the matter, and was told that, illness could happen to all of us as well. And similarly, when he saw a dead body, he was told that this was the fate of all of us. Now, Siddhartha, being a sensitive young man, asked his father about this. His father said it was none of your concern and forbade him to leave the palace grounds. His father said that he must prepare to be a great ruler. But Siddhartha was not satisfied, and so one night, leaving his wife and young child behind, he sneaked out of the palace and went in search of the answers to the question of suffering. He went into the forest and joined up with a group of ascetic yogis who believed that the answer to the question of suffering could be found in the rejection of all material things. He deprived himself as much as he physically could, but did not find the answers he was looking for. From this, he had his first great insight. Understanding was not found in either the extremes of luxury or asceticism. Rather, understanding was to be found in what came to be called the middle way. And so Siddhartha entered upon a quest of meditation and yoga, seeking to find enlightenment. One night, he sat down under a tree, which thereafter was called the Bodhi or the enlightenment tree, vowing to sit there until he achieved enlightenment, understanding the causes and remedies of suffering. Again, the story veers off into the realm of myth, but the denouement is that Siddhartha, now the Buddha or enlightened one, came up with the insights into the cause and remedy of suffering that have become the heart of what we now know as the Buddhist religion, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. After being tempted by Mara, the evil one, with the prospect of immediately entering nirvana himself, the Buddha instead chose to spend the remaining 45 years or so of his life teaching the world about the middle way so that others could find the path that he did and achieve their own enlightenment. So what exactly is meant by enlightenment, at least in this Buddhist context? Buddhist monk, author, and photographer Matthew Ricard puts it this way: enlightenment is a state of perfect knowledge or wisdom, combined with infinite compassion. Let me repeat that. Enlightenment is a state of perfect knowledge or wisdom, combined with infinite compassion. Knowledge in this case does not merely mean the accumulation of data or description of the world of phenomena down to the finest details. Enlightenment is an understanding of both the relative mode of existence, the way in which things appear to us, and the ultimate mode of existence, the true nature of these same appearances. This includes our own minds as well as the external world. Such knowledge is the basic antidote for ignorance and suffering. Note that enlightenment is not the knowledge or wisdom for its own sake. Siddhartha did not begin his spiritual quest because he was curious about the world outside the palace. Rather, his journey was prompted by his compassion for the old, the sick, and dying persons he encountered in that world beyond the palace. He was moved by their suffering and looked for a way to alleviate it. This led him to his basic teachings, including what we call the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Ricard relates this story about the Buddha. Once a man asked the Buddha some questions about cosmology. In reply, the Buddha picked up a handful of leaves and asked, "Are there more leaves in my hands or in the forest?" "Well, there are more in the forest, of course," replied the man. The Buddha went on, "Well, the leaves in my hand represent the knowledge which leads to the end of suffering." In this way, the Buddha showed that certain questions are superfluous. The world has limitless fields of study, as numerous as the leaves in the forest. But what we want more than anything else is enlightenment, then it is better to concentrate entirely on that aim and gather together only the knowledge that is directly relevant to our quest. Now, some criticize Buddhism for being too focused on the inward journey, on the quest for personal enlightenment. Other religious traditions, some forms of Christianity, for example, may be open to the same charge. Yet the work of modern Buddhist teachers can help belie these claims. For example, Thich Nhat Hanh, the venerable Vietnamese Buddhist teacher, commented in the following interview with the writer John Malkin. Malkin asked, "People feel that they need to choose between being engaged in social change or working on personal and spiritual growth. What would you say to those people?" Thich Nhat Hanh replies, "I think that view is rather dualistic. The practice should address suffering, the suffering within yourself and the suffering around you. They are linked to each other. When you go to the mountain and practice alone, you don't have the chance to recognize the anger, the jealousy, and despair that's in you. That's why it's good that you encounter people, so you know these emotions, so that you recognize them and try to look into their nature. If you don't know the roots of these afflictions, you cannot see the path leading to their cessation. That's why suffering is very important for our practice." Now, as a young monk in the late 1950s and early 60s, Thich Nhat Hanh observed the destruction of the Vietnam War up close. He recalls that when the bombs begin to fall on people, you cannot stay in the meditation hall all of the time. And in fact, he was such an effective opponent of the war that when he came to the United States to lecture in 1966, the Vietnamese government would not let him come home. For Thich Nhat Hanh, while mindfulness and meditation practice is central to his life, it is only meaningful when combined with an effort to alleviate the suffering in the world. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, leader of the world's Tibetan Buddhists, responds to the question of what is meant by enlightenment by saying, "According to Buddhism, all our efforts ultimately should go to training and shaping our minds. Emotions such as hatred or strong attachment are destructive and harmful. We call them negative emotions. So how can we reduce these negative emotions? Not through prayer, not through physical exercise, but through training of the mind. Through training of the mind, we try to increase the opposite qualities. When genuine compassion, infinite compassion, or unbiased compassion is increased, hatred is reduced. When equanimity is increased, attachment is reduced. All of these destructive emotions are based on ignorance, and the opposite or antidote of ignorance is enlightenment." These notions of enlightenment date from the 5th century before the Common Era, yet they are as pertinent today as they have been over the preceding 25 centuries. The central point of Buddhism from the beginning has been the alleviation of suffering. Not just some speculative suffering in a future time based on one's misdeeds in this life. Rather, it is the alleviating of the suffering that is in the here and now. When asked the origins of engaged Buddhism, Thich Nhat Hanh responded, engaged Buddhism is just Buddhism. In other words, a Buddhist cannot separate action for social justice from Buddhist practice. Again, Thich Nhat Hanh puts it, Buddhism has to do with your daily life, with your suffering and with the suffering of the people around you. You have to learn how to help a wounded child while still practicing mindful breathing. You should not allow yourself to get lost in the action. Action should be meditation at the same time. Now, this is not just a Buddhist notion. Religion or faith properly understand is not just something you belong to or profess aside from the rest of your life. Rather, at its best, it is part of who you are. Now, at times, this is not necessarily a good thing. We can become so invested in the absolute truth of our own religion that we lose sight of the humanity of others and their sincerely held beliefs. We can, in the words of Jesus, as reported in the Gospel, see the speck in another's eye, but fail to see the log in our own eye. We can see the failings in another's religion, but fail to see the shortcomings in our own. As has become evident in recent weeks, that appears to be happening around this country and, in fact, around the world. Those who are quick to condemn terrorism committed in the name of Islam, or in reality, the name of a skewed and extreme version of 1st century Islam, 6th century Islam, are often less willing to condemn acts of terror committed in the names of other religions, such as Christianity. What the Buddha and his followers have taught over the centuries and up to this very day is that enlightenment is not just for the enlightened person. Rather, enlightenment is a means to another end, the end of alleviating suffering for all creatures. In a sense, it's a kind of universal salvation, much like that preached by John Murray and Hosea Ballou in other religious contexts. So what may enlightenment mean to a Unitarian Universalist? It could be said, a bit tongue-in-cheek, that perhaps while Christians find salvation through grace or good works, depending on the flavor of Christianity, Unitarian Universalists seek salvation through knowledge. But knowledge is, as pointed out by both Thich Nhat Hanh and the Dalai Lama, part of the path to enlightenment. But if we only seek knowledge for his own sake, we may earn our PhD or our MDiv, but will not find true enlightenment. We should remember that enlightenment is based both of knowledge and compassion. In fact, the enlightenment of the 18th century is a central element of our religious heritage. Replacing blind faith in revealed religion with a rational study of religious truths form part of the superstructure of the newly emerging Unitarian faith. The development of the scientific method and new, more scholarly studies of scriptures allowed for new types of religious expression. Yet at times, we perhaps left behind the compassionate heart, that which was the center of the more primitive Christianity, the early days following the death of Jesus. Sometimes we got the knowledge, but not the compassion. It's time to recover both. December 8th, this coming Tuesday, is Bodhi Day, a celebration of the life and teachings of the Buddha and of his enlightenment. Let us use that as a time to reflect on what enlightenment might mean to us, both from the perspective of knowledge and compassion. Both seem to be sorely missing from our public religious and political conversation this year.